All right, let's jump right into this explainer. You know, for decades, we've relied on traditional silicon chips to power pretty much everything, right? From the phone in your pocket to these massive artificial intelligence models. But here's the thing, we're hitting a wall. We are rapidly approaching the physical and energetic limits of standard silicon. So we're standing at this crazy precipice where we essentially have to choose between two totally different paths. Do we build the ultimate artificial silicon brain, or do we actually harness the power of living cells?
I mean, seriously, what if your next computer chip wasn't a piece of metal, but something that actually breathed, grew, and learned? It sounds like sci-fi, but we are undergoing this massive shift towards systems that are incredibly dynamic. Today, we're going to break down the key difference between neuromorphic computing, where absolutely everything is man-made, and biocomputing. With biocomputing, the main machine learning part is actually biology. We're talking taking skin, turning it into stem cells, and growing them into actual living neurons, either as 2D layers or 3D organoids.
So let's get into Section 1, the computing energy crisis.
Why are we even looking at these wild computing methods? Well, we have to look at the massive energy crisis that's basically crippling traditional AI right now. The big issue here is the von Neumann bottleneck. Traditional computers physically separate the processing unit from the memory unit. It's kind of like a chef who has to walk all the way across a huge restaurant to the pantry every single time they need a pinch of salt. It takes forever, and it burns a ton of energy. Actually, standard computers waste up to 40% of their total computing energy just shuttling data back and forth between memory and the processor.
Now check this out, 20 watts. That is the total amount of energy your brain, the human brain, uses to perform incredibly complex cognition. To put that 20 watts into perspective, that barely powers a dim little incandescent light bulb. Meanwhile, traditional GPUs used for basic AI tasks, they're chugging hundreds of watts. And those massive AI data centers, they literally consume enough electricity to power small cities. The human brain is just the absolute gold standard for efficiency, and computer scientists are desperate to copy it.
Which brings us to Section 2, Neuromorphic, the silicon brain.
Okay, so let's look at the first solution, building a completely man-made, artificial replica of the brain's architecture. In this neuromorphic approach, the hardware is 100% engineered. Scientists are taking materials like silicon and graphene and physically building a synthetic brain. And instead of your standard transistors, they use these things called memristors, which act like artificial synapses. The real game changer here is that neuromorphic chips compute and store memory in the exact same physical spot. So bam, that von Neumann bottleneck we just talked about, completely eliminated.
And unlike traditional chips that are just always on, constantly drawing power, these neuromorphic chips are event-driven. They use spiking neural networks. So an artificial neuron literally only consumes power when a specific event makes it spike or fire. If there's no activity happening, the chip just sits there in a near-zero power state. It's a brilliant way to engineer artificial physics, so it mimics the sparse, efficient way biological networks work.
And the payoff for that sparse activation is just staggering. We're talking up to 1,000 times more energy efficient than conventional chips for certain tasks. 1,000 times. We're already seeing some wild prototypes out there, like IBM's True North chip, which packs in 1 million digital neurons, or Intel's Loiha, which has 128,000 artificial neurons and 128 million synapses. These systems are incredibly fast, they're massively parallel, and remember, they are entirely man-made.
Moving right along to Section 3, Biocomputing, the living computer.
All right, now let's pivot to this wildly different second path, where the computer is quite literally alive. Instead of simulating the brain with silicon, organoid intelligence, or OI, uses actual biological wetware. So, scientists take living human brain cells, cultivated from stem cells, and grow them into 2D or 3D mini-brains called organoids. I mean, think about that. These aren't artificial networks programmed to act like cells. They are cells. They inherently know how to self-assemble and compute.
It's honestly mind-blowing how scientists actually pull this off in the lab. Remember that stem cell to neuron pipeline? They take stem cells, cultivate them into these 3D neural organoids, and then place this living tissue directly onto high-density multi-electrode arrays. Those electrodes are the bridge, the translator between the squishy biological tissue and our digital hardware. By pinging them with specific electrical and chemical stimuli, researchers can actually train the organoids. And we're talking about real biological learning here, not the mathematical machine learning algorithms we use in standard AI.
To ground this in reality, check out this incredible breakthrough that was published in the Neuron Journal. Researchers at a company called Cortical Labs created an organoid system they called DishBrain.
They literally hooked up this living network of cells to a computer simulation of the classic video game Pong, and by giving the cells electrical feedback based on how they were doing, the living cells actually learned how to play the game. No way, right? But it actually happened. And this isn't just some one-off science fair experiment anymore. It's turning into a real industry. Companies like Final Spark are launching remote research platforms, so scientists anywhere in the world can log in via the cloud and run experiments on biological neurons remotely. Cortical Labs even unveiled the CL1, which is a commercially available biological computer. It integrates traditional silicon hardware with a complex internal life support system that can sustain hundreds of thousands of living neurons for up to 6 months, so they can learn in real time.
Okay, Section 4, man-made versus biological. If we put these two post-silicon solutions head-to-head, it really highlights this massive fork in the road we're facing. On one side, neuromorphic computing relies strictly on silicon, metal, and those artificial memory stores. It's engineered hardware desperately trying to mimic biology. On the flip side, biocomputing is using actual stem cells and 3D organoids that form real, self-assembling biological synapses. So one path forces us to engineer wildly complex artificial physics, while the other forces us to figure out how to program and, well, feed actual living biology.
And neither path is a walk in the park. Neuromorphic computing really struggles with scale. Even our best chips today fall so incredibly short of the 86 billion neurons in a human brain. Plus, they require entirely new programming frameworks because you can't just run traditional code on a spiking network. Biocomputing, though, that comes with the headache of wrangling living cells. Biological tissue is unpredictable, training it is highly chaotic, and you can't just plug an organoid into a wall outlet. It needs constant, super precise life support, nutrients, and strict pH balances just to stay alive.
Let's transition to Section 5, the ethical wetware frontier.
This brings up a really crucial aspect of biocomputing that those neuromorphic silicon chips just completely sidestep: the ethics of wetware. Because biocomputers use actual human tissue derived from stem cells, researchers are having to work incredibly closely with bioethicists to answer some massive, unprecedented questions. For example, what is the actual moral status of a biological computer model? What happens if a high-density 3D brain organoid develops some form of rudimentary sentience or consciousness? And then there's the legal side. Complex questions about stem cell donor consent, like who ultimately owns the computational output of a computer made from donated human cells. It's a lot to unpack.
And finally, Section 6, the future of intelligence. So what's the big takeaway from this explainer about the future of how our machines will think? Ultimately, it might not be a strict either-or choice between the two. The real revolution might actually be hybrid biosilicon computers. Imagine a system that perfectly fuses the raw speed and precision of digital electronics with the natural adaptability, self-repair, and just unmatched energy efficiency of living neural networks. We could absolutely see a near future where digital neuromorphic chips handle all the standard processing, but a coprocessor made of living tissue tackles the highly complex pattern recognition and adaptive learning.
I'm going to leave you to ponder this incredible paradigm shift. When our computers are built from living human brain cells, where exactly does the machine end and the human begin? As we push past the limits of traditional tech and dive deep into this post-silicon era, the line between technology and biology is about to blur forever. Whether we build artificial silicon brains or harness the chaotic power of living cells, the definition of a computer is changing for good. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.